Hi, everybody. I'm Scott,
And I am Luke.
And I'm Jonathan.
and this is the No Way to Hollywood podcast, back again for your enjoyment.
Yeah, sorry about the delay for like a couple of weeks. I got sick, and then my wife got sick, and it just kind of ruined life for a little bit. I'm sorry, everybody.
We got sick of them being sick. There was a
I
lot of
mean,
sick.
yeah, that's true.
We were definitely sick of them being sick. But in addition to that, we were all trying to see a movie that we could talk about
Yeah,
for
I had
this
to miss the opening night showing with the peoples because I was sick, but thankfully I got to see it.
But
It's
yeah, we finally got to see the French Dispatch, and the Wes Anderson movie really is good. If you, oh,
I
is that not?
mean, I am a fan of Wes Anderson, and I would like to see the French Dispatch.
Me too. I haven't seen it yet.
It looks intriguing. I might have to go. I might have to go sometime this weekend. We'll see. But that is not the movie we're talking about tonight, and you should all be glad about that.
we're talking about Dune because that's the title of the freaking video. So we're talking about Dune here.
Jonathan, being the person that was probably most excited for Dune
True.
that I knew,
Mm-hmm.
Go.
what was that first experience like for you?
It's pretty good. The visuals were fun, sound was fun, but I have to admit that even after the first viewing, that the movie was not as satisfying as I wanted it to be. That was honestly my first impression, but it was had some really cool things, and it had some cool visuals, cool sound, cool things going on. But I think by the end of it, I was kind of exhausted, and I think I was also a little bit underwhelmed by what I had seen. I think that's where I came out of the first viewing.
Okay. Luke, you did not get to go to see it in the Dolby with us.
No, I'm kind of sad about that because yeah, the color mix and all that stuff does not work as well on an IMAX projector because they color corrected it dark. In fact, it was interesting because I was thinking back to the trailer when they showed a couple of the shots, and I was like, wow, these were a lot better than the trailer because you actually color corrected it properly. Now I get from the story standpoint that this has to be dark and blah blah blah, but it looks terrible. Like it's hard to see stuff. So all of your work that you put into this can't see half of it on an IMAX screen. Now maybe on the Dolby screen you could see more of it, but yeah, the color, the sound, yeah, this is a problem with modern films that I'm experiencing where I'm like, I don't know what you just said, and since your character said it, I'm assuming that it's important. Not that I'm not, not that I'm lost. I know what's going on overall.
I mean, this could be lost in translation where they purposely don't want you to hear what's being said.
right.
You mean
And,
Tenet, where
yeah,
they just
like
had people
with Tenet,
talking, but
yeah.
they purposely crank up the volume of everything else?
Yeah, but that's how I felt. That's how I felt here too, where there were several sequences where I'm like, I know people are saying something right now, and I'm getting like enough of it to be like, okay, I have a gist. But like, if you're gonna write dialogue, like I should be able to hear it as an audience member. I think so. I was kind of frustrated on that front, where just I'm going to IMAX and it's not as beautiful as it should be, and it's not as clear as it should be, and everything's just kind of not mixed well, and that just kind of made me sad. But that's that. What was your question? Did I answer that?
It was first impressions question.
Okay, so first impressions is I got done with the movie. I was like, it's fine. It's not great. It's not bad. It's not even it's not even good, but it's fine. It's a story that like okay, I saw a story, and as I've talked about it a little bit more, as I thought about it sitting there while the credits are rolling, I'm like it's because I'm not emotionally invested in anybody. It's a movie of plot points that happen, and I am following along with them, and they are moderately interesting. But I am not invested in any one of the characters at all. At no point in time do you give me a reason to do so. And it's interesting. I watched a Critical Drinker video, and he talks about something, overviewing the story, and I'm like, oh, that's in the book because it's absolutely not in the movie. Like what you just said isn't in the movie, and that happens a lot with Critical Drinker, where if he likes a movie, he'll tell you this plot point. But I'm like, but that's not in the film. That's just something you like about it. I don't know. So
yeah. Well,
yeah.
Luke, I will say my first impression was, man, I'm glad I read the book.
I can see that.
Because ultimately, I mean, and the book is obviously this was part 1 of part 2.
Right.
The book was so good about just making you invest in the characters, and the scenes in the book where you really like dove in, like, yeah, some of those happened in the movie, but they were done so fast and without much thought that you really did lose a lot of what was going on, and you lost that connection. And then honestly, I looked at it and went, I think the only reason I feel connected with these characters is because I read the book, because I know more about these characters than what the movie is telling me or sharing with me. So I was like, yeah, okay, they kept pretty close to the book, and I was glad for that. I liked some of the choices they made on the technical side of things that it sounds like you did not like as much, but ultimately, like, I thought they did a good job of telling the story. But you're right, like, there is a lot missing that the book does such a good job with that the movie just did not.
Well, and what it sounds like is missing is all of the actual character motivation stuff that, aside from like, hey, my family got killed, so I should probably do something. Like, aside from that, like, broad strokes, I'm not in any character's head enough to be like, I'm rooting for you or anything, right? So I don't know, and that's because I purposely did not get the book on Audible or anything ahead of time, because I was like, how does this movie stand on its own? And I would say it's fine on its own. But as many people have pointed out, this is part 1. It's all the setup for the actual story. So, I'm hopeful that part 2 is actually good.
Okay, but in the book, it literally could have been 2 separate books, because there is while it is set up in the first half of the book, it is still the story of Paul and how he gets to where he's at. And that's the story that we have, right? And it's way more intriguing in the book, in my opinion. That I was actually sad that in the book they jumped a period of time to the second part, which is what we're going to get next, and then all this other stuff happens. And the second half has a lot more stuff related to some of the other characters. So Paul actually kind of steps back as the main character, even though he is the main character.
Sure. And that we can talk about when we get to part 2.
Exactly. Which it sounds like they greenlit, right, Jonathan?
Yes, they greenlit. They're going to do Dune Part 2, which I will go see, and I think I will hopefully enjoy. And I do want to get across, there's definitely an enjoyment I had watching Dune Part 1 for the first time. I went through a process of watching Dune at the Dolby for the first time, then watching 40 minutes of it on HBO Max, then watching it entirely again with Luke and others at an IMAX showing. And I have to concur with Luke that, and having seen both of them within a week, by the way, Dolby destroyed IMAX in every conceivable way as far as I'm concerned. Absolutely, IMAX is a bigger screen. I don't care. It doesn't matter if you're like, literally the HDR capabilities of the Dolby Atmos, the Dolby Vision screen were just super important, especially for this movie, as we've hinted at. And the audio was a lot more precise. I think that both in the Dolby and on the TV and on IMAX, there were sequences I still couldn't hear very well, but there were other sections where in IMAX I couldn't hear it at all, or I could only hear half of something, but in the Dolby I could hear all of it. I understood what was being said. So there's something about the sound mix that's not as precise. So sort of little PSA, I guess, to the side. IMAX, don't do it. Just go see it in a Dolby if you can, because that would truly be, I mean, it's my favorite format, but I want to see, again, anytime they actually make it for IMAX, I want to go see what they're doing. Done various Christopher Nolan movies that way. But I got to say, after doing this experiment, almost experiment, Dolby Atmos is absolutely the way to go for watching this film. So I don't know if that also colored my viewpoint a little bit on my second time watching it all the way through or whatnot. I have to also say that once I saw it, it was in like, there was lots of stuff I was thinking about with the movie and about like why this and this, and I like this, or what do I feel about that? So like it definitely stuck with me. It's not a movie where it was just trash and I wanted to forget about it immediately. Nowhere close to that. Where I've been trying to hold back my opinions till like now, till I've seen it a couple times to see if anything settled for me. And what I've noticed is my easiest, fastest way to say things without any details is to say, I don't think it's a bad movie. I also don't think it's a great movie. I think it's an okay movie, a good movie on some levels, but I also think there's enough strikes against it that the more I think about them, the more I'm like, why did you do that? And it makes me think about filmmaking and audiences as a whole, and what is the perception of what is good or bad? What is perception of adult movie versus not adult movie? There are various things in my mind with all of that. But that's me trying to get to a very succinct way of talking about my overall settled opinions on Dune after watching it 2.5 times.
Cool. Well, it sounds like there were absolutely some elements of this movie that were done well or were good or that you liked. So let's start by kind of talking about those things. What about this movie, either from a technical standpoint or a story standpoint or an enjoyment standpoint, what did they do well?
I like multiple things. I'll start listing some. I like the opening prologue that sets you up for what this universe is. It just as a sequence. I like that sequence a lot. I like I think the visual effects in this film are like practically flawless. Watching it, especially that first time, everything just felt real or felt like it was somehow practically done on a model or something. Like it felt more like that, even though I knew there was VFX involved. It all felt really good to me. It felt really, really good. And that was really helpful since this movie is largely tons of crazy visuals and they've got to sell you this environment and this world. And I think that really helps take it up a notch to a realism factor, a sort of, it kind of grounds this really kind of weird story, fantasy and sci-fi elements out the wazoo. I like that. I like the way they did some sound design for things like the weirding stuff, like the voice that they use and some of the ways they did some of those sound design things. There were definitely, I'm a little split on the score because there are things about the score I like, but I find the score to be mostly sound design. And I don't really like that. And I think that Hans is like pumping the score hard at like all times. It's not truly that way, but there's a lot of sequences where it's like the score is just really loud. It's like a ship leaving. And it's supposed to make you, I think it's supposed to help you get your emotions somewhere. But anyway, that's a little bit the other direction. But there are other things about the score that I like. There's the way they use voices, the way they use chants, the way they some of those musical themes and whatnot. I like it sort of the music and the sound design sort of go together pretty hard. So I like sound design stuff going on in that. I think it gets like, I know some of the major scenes from the book and some of them I think are done very well. I think that the hand in the box scene is done very well. I think that and it's almost too faithful to the book at times, like the shield. Like, let's introduce what shields are and the knife fight with Gurney Halleck. That just feels like it's straight out of the book, which is cool. Like it's good. The environment, the production design, the costumes, the environments, the visual effects, sort of all the background stuff feels really good. There's scenes where just a ship's landing, and I was thinking to myself, this is awesome. This is just really cool, and it feels good that it's really cool. The story is a lot more complicated for me in that. And that gets more into half and half. So I'll just start with that as some things I liked.
I mean, I was never bored in the film. There were some times when I was like, I wonder how I would cut this and how I would change things and what I would do here to make it better. But I was not bored. So for a 3-hour film and people telling me, oh, it's a slow burn and all this stuff, going into it being like, okay, be prepared for like being bored, and I wasn't. So that's really good. Like, that's excellent. Yeah, and overall the visuals were good. You did some good special effects, which is great. That's what you do. So excellent. Acting was fine. Yeah. So I think it's fine as a film. It's fine, and they do some fine things. But even ships and spaceships and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, maybe it's because it's hard to get back to those moments of being a kid and experiencing really hardcore stuff for the first time that like comes at you, but like Star Wars for me is far more visceral and engaging in the ship design and that kind of stuff than this, which is far more, I'm watching it from way back here. And so that's a big ship and cool, but I don't feel it. I'm not in it. And so,
They
yeah.
didn't quite have the same point of view shots that Star Wars has that make you go, oh.
Yeah, or Battlestar Galactica or whatever, like where I feel it.
Yeah,
Instead, I'm
yeah,
just
it's
witnessing
like-
it.
It's not a fighter pilot thing though. Like
Right.
the closest you're going to get to that is the ornithopter stuff with when they
Right.
go and try to save the crawler or they
Right.
save the crew, and that's actually pretty good. But it's not like a fighter pilot in the
Right.
cockpit feeling, right? It to me when I just mean that it feels really grounded, and I also I think there's another thing which maybe another way to put it is there's a lot of scale in this movie that I felt. Like I get the sense of how big everything is. And I don't know why everyone in this universe designs things like 30 times bigger than they probably need to be, but like everything in this movie, everything in this world is like 30 times bigger than normal. Every spaceship is just ginormous. Every city, building is like this huge monstrosity. Like that's just the nature of this world. And of course, the sandworms are supposed to be freaking huge and magnificent and like, holy crap, the world's shaking because they're coming closer. And I think that they did that very well. But sorry, continue.
No, so yeah, I don't know if I have anything else to say on like this was good. It was fine. It was fine.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting what they did with, like you mentioned, the coloring earlier, and just how dark a majority of this movie is.
Which I mean, when it's night or pre-dawn, like okay, it makes sense that it's dark, but like then you're gonna do something cool and I can't see it.
Well, and I would go back to a lot of what I saw them doing was explained better in the book, right? So I get the concept because I know more of what's going on behind the scenes than the movie tells. And I can look at the movie as a standalone and go, there's so much here that people aren't going to get, or choices that were made that you're just not going to get because you don't know the full depth of the world. And maybe they tell you a little bit here at some point, but it was like, to me, it felt like they brushed across those themes that would have justified the choices that were being made, specifically with coloring and stuff like that.
So it's interesting because all of this is making me think then that this is a movie that's an add-on to the book experience, right? We're like, hey, you've gone through the book experience, and now go watch the movie and enjoy the sweeping scale of what we've been able to create as a fan of the book. And
Right.
that is very different from come enjoy this movie that we made that's based off of this book, and you'll be able to enjoy it that way, right? Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
This definitely isn't Star Wars where you get into the world and you understand the world just by watching the movie. The way the book was written has an incredible depth to it that like if they really wanted to show all that and tell all that, we would have had a 4-part Dune series with bad endings because you can't have an ending in a spot that's halfway through a story, right? So I don't know. Like,
So it should have been a miniseries.
Right,
It
that's
should
what I was
have been
wondering.
It should have been a Netflix show with a
Right.
or HBO Max show with a really big budget that somehow was shown in theaters. Like that's what it should have been. And that's the thing is, Dune has always been notoriously really hard to adapt. And that's where I will say that I am not an expert in the book, but knowing the story well enough and knowing enough of what you have to do filmically, it's like, well, I am surprised that my friends who don't know anything about the story and don't know anything about the book followed along well enough and understood enough of the things. Because that surprises me. Because like you, Scott, to some extent, I was watching the movie and I was like, how are newbies going to catch anything that's really going on? Like,
yeah. Oh,
like
yeah.
you don't know what that is. You don't know what that is. Like, how are you going to do this? And sure enough, I've got friends who've never read the book, who don't know anything about the story, watched it, kept along, at least on a surface level, kept along and enjoyed it well enough.
Yes.
And
Well,
so
and
that's kind of fascinating to me.
And that's some of the other feedback that I've heard from people I know that have watched it, that may not have read the book or have tried to start reading the book and can't get past the beginning because, I mean, Luke, I know you were entertained by the movie the entire time. I actually got a little bored at one point during the first third of the movie and was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to start dozing. Don't doze. Don't do it. Don't do it. And I mean, I can fall asleep anywhere, as you guys well know. And now everybody else in the world knows.
Anyway.
But it was still one of those like, man, there's so much that gets left out. And yeah, it still feels true to the book. But yeah, I see choices that were made by the filmmakers. And I go, well, that's interesting, but that's interesting because I know what I know, not because I got into this world from what you did.
Okay, can I just go off for a bit on this? Because I have many thoughts. I really dislike the darkness of the movie, whether it's Dolby, TV, or IMAX. I have just never been a fan of the dark scenes. Now, I absolutely understand. Like, I think a few things about it. In fact, it's kind of become a whole topic. Like, almost there might even be an entire episode just to talk about this because I have these ideas about it. But fundamentally, I understand it's night. I understand you want to keep things grounded. Okay, and I feel like that's the very bare minimum of why those choices might have been made. Scott, you seem to have potentially a belief about something with the book that might make you think is going on that would be adding to that decision. You can also say that it's a mood thing. It's like this is sort of a dour world and things are kind of hard and cold. So it's not like a colorful, fun thing. At night, it's dark, it's hard. Like this is what this world is. But regardless of any of those arguments that I can think of in my mind, they're all beaten immediately by, I'd like to see what's going on. And I'd like there to be a little bit more visual interest when things are happening. This is a massive epic. And it's got some really cool things going for it, even with what's going on. I just think the color correction or decision is not my favorite. I believe, now I might need to double check on this, but I believe the cinematographer is Greg Fraser, who I believe has worked with Nolan in the past. And let me tell you something about Nolan and his freaking stuff is that it also annoys me. He doesn't necessarily do this same exact thing, but he loves to be pretty bland and dry, I feel like, in a lot of his stuff as well, as far as it's got to be realist. It's always in the naturalist, realist spectrum, except for Inception, which everyone likes. So I have an issue where, like, I don't want this movie doesn't have to be Star Wars. It doesn't have to be super colorful, crazy, awesome, Mad Max or something. It doesn't have to be that. But I do believe that more style, more color, brighter exposure would really help to just bring visual interest to everything that's going on. Because half this movie, if not more, is at night or indoors with really low lighting, which helps add to the world. And I'm okay with that. But again, how you do that, how you color correct that, how you expose that is so key. And I feel like I'm in a minority. There's so many people, at least there's critics I'm reading and so on and so forth, who are like, Greg Fraser's cinematography is just amazing. I'm like, are you sure that's what you mean? Do you mean there's really good scale? Do you mean that it's like really cool? There's really cool visual effects? Do you mean there's some really cool chosen framing decisions? Because I can agree with you on that. But when it comes to exposure and cinematography basics, I don't like the decisions being made. So that's one thing I feel for sure. It feels like you're going to say something, Scott. You're going to say something?
Well, I was just going to say I don't disagree with that assessment. I think it makes like the choice of how they portrayed some of Paul's dream sequences more interesting because as we caught a still frame or a GIF that we all looked at some point earlier today, and it was very much a like, wow, that looks like the brightest scene in the movie, and I quickly pointed out, I'm pretty sure this is part of his dream sequence.
Yeah.
Right. And it gives you that contrast, and that's great. except for we're not at the part of the story where, I don't know. I think they may have overdone some of the dream sequences at this early in the story to try and show you what's going on or to help you be part of that world. But there does come a point, I mean, when he's basically living in this dream world while acting in the present world, story-wise. So I mean, that's more my curiosity for the future, though. But I'm curious to know, like, are they going to make some of these same color choices in part 2, or exposure choices in part 2, and how does that play within what's going on?
My hope, I don't know that I will buy it, but my hope is that part 2 is largely going to be Fremen stuff. And you know that if you've seen the movie, regardless, like, you know, it's going to have to be largely Fremen stuff. But knowing the story, I can tell you it's largely Fremen stuff in the second half. Okay. And it could be one of those things where, like, here's the normal world, which happens to be the entirety of the movie here, but here's the normal world. And as the character goes from the normal world into the special world, we're going to make the special world special and brighter and cooler and more interesting. And that could happen. And that would be really nice. But right now, ain't nothing special. And it makes me sad. And that's my opinion. I find it fairly monochromatic. I find it fairly dark, and I don't like the visual style. I have issues.
And according to IMDb, it looks like he did not work on any of the Nolan films. So it's two people doing the same thing.
What did Greg Fraser do then? What's his filmography?
He's got 44 cinematography credits to his name, including things like Snow White and the Huntsman. And and he's doing the new Batman. And
that makes sense.
Yeah, he's doing a lot of stuff. So yeah, he's doing a lot, but it's not. I didn't see any of Nolan's films in that list there.
How did I get that mixed up? I'm sorry, everybody.
Because it looks the same.
You know what it is? Freaking Zero Dark 30. He just did Zero Dark 30 over again, but now it's Dune.
There you go.
I didn't like Zero Dark. Anyway, all right. So, that's just a visual component, okay? Story-wise, there are things I like. There's things I don't like. There's things I probably enjoyed more than Luke did, just because I might know a little bit more than Luke does about the story. But there's things that Scott may enjoy more than I do, because he probably knows the story better than I do, because he's read the book more recently, right? Like, there's all that at play here. And I absolutely agree that one of my opinions is simply that, yeah, this is kind of like uber fan fiction. This is something for people who've read the book and want to see it realized, like a companion piece almost. And they tried to find a balance. I know these guys worked really hard to adapt this in such a way that it would please books fans and also be something that newcomers could come into. And in a lot of ways, they seem to have done it. But it's interesting because I guess I fall somewhere in the middle of that spectrum that just sort of falls in a dip of the spectrum, because I'm kind of like, there's things that are cool, but I wish you had given more. I wish you had. This is where there's an entire video essay from Filmento about Blade Runner 2049, Denis Villeneuve, versus Dune, Denis Villeneuve, and the idea of how subtle are you with characters and their emotions and their motivations and plot and what's happening. And I think one of the biggest strikes against this movie, in my opinion, is no matter how much you like it, no matter how much you know the book, there are just things you don't know as an audience member. There are things that are not planted to be paid off by the end of this movie, or choices that characters are making that you don't understand they're making because you don't know there's a choice, and you don't know the significance of this. And some of that could be a little bit of a subtlety problem, where maybe some people get it and they understand the subtlety, and so it works for them and they love it, which I've been there. It was really fun when you get it, when it's that subtle. But I didn't get it half the time. Or maybe I don't know the percentage, but there's times I didn't get it. And I'm like, I would really care a lot more if I knew what the choice was, if I knew why this mattered more than just the immediate situation. What does this imply? What does this mean? What does this symbolize? And I think that is just too subtle or not there too often.
Right. And it's interesting because, thinking about like Troy versus the last fight sequence in Dune, right? Where like, in Troy, there's clear setup of characters and why they are fighting and why it matters. And so then there are stakes and there's stuff. Even if it doesn't actually change like the state of the city in the end, it changes this dynamic. And that is what that last fight sequence should be doing in Dune, but it doesn't, because it's just like, okay, oh, here's this random line of dialogue that tells you that this is more important than you realized because it's actually a life-changing moment for our character. well, that might have been nice to know before we got to this moment and this random line of dialogue, because then I'd care about it more coming into it, right? And then also, like, and I don't see how this matters, really. Like, I have a vague conception of this is important because it's setting us on a path for something, but this whole movie has been setting me on a path for something. So why is this moment actually different from everything else that's happened in this film to get us to this moment, right? So, like, there are some serious problems with that, whereas there's other movies where it's like, hey, here's the same sequence, but, like, I'm way more invested.
Yeah, I just the full, like, I started off with saying I just wasn't satisfied the way I wanted to be for a reason, which is there's been no viewing of this movie where I have really felt satisfied. Now, granted, as everyone has said, it's part one of a story, and they know that, and they're not like doing it. Like, I get that, but there's been comparisons in critic reviews to both Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Denis Villeneuve himself has said this is Star Wars for adults, and I kind of take issue with that for multiple reasons. One, Star Wars is plenty for adults, by the way. At least the old school stuff was plenty for adults. It's fantasy. I know it's somewhat childish. It's not like really heady stuff. I get that, but it's not like adults can enjoy it. In fact, many do. Two, this is not Star Wars for adults. I'm sorry. It simply is not. And it's not Lord of the Rings either. Lord of the Rings Fellowship of the Ring, and it could be because the book and the story of Lord of the Rings just has a nicer endpoint for everything as far as the first chapter. But as far as Lord of the Rings, the Fellowship of the Ring, that's still my favorite part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. That movie, it works so well and has an ending, even though all this stuff is unresolved, has such a satisfying ending, and you know what everything is, and you care the whole time. It is very, very good, and I love it. But Dune Part 1 is not comparable, in part because I didn't care. Like, getting into the characters, there is some nice things going on. Like, I like that you're letting me think. I like that you're not treating me like a dum-dum, but you're going too subtle, or you're not telling me enough, and I'm not caring. You're not doing things visually enough for me to be spectacled in a way that I would prefer. Although apparently lots of adults, lots of journalists, like, there's guys who are coming out of this saying it made me feel like a kid again. It was such an like, there are people who are coming out of the movie feeling that way. And that is, again, that's another whole episode. I feel like that plus the like the visual thing, like, I have a lot to talk about that issue alone. Like, that is something fascinating to me. But there are people coming out of this movie saying that the spectacle of it all just blew them away, that it made them feel like a kid again. And that must be kind of what Denis Villeneuve was going for, and it worked for at least some, if not a lot of people.
But okay, I hate to keep going back to the book because the book is so flippin' good, but the choices they made in terms of the spectacle in the movie felt like a half-ass attempt to cover what they were doing in the book.
Yeah,
like,
sword fighting, the knife fighting is,
oh my goodness,
is kind of pathetic, honestly.
And
I, as an action film lover, and as knowing a little bit about the story and knowing the whole thing with this, and I was curious from the get-go, is how do you do action right when the whole thing is somehow fast doesn't get through the shield, slow does? How do you choreograph a fight scene where you're going to fight multiple dudes and you've got to, like, be fast enough to defend yourself on some level, but slow enough and sly enough to somehow get under the shield and then kill somebody? Like, how does that work? And I was looking forward to that. And quite frankly, I don't think I saw it in any of the fight sequences. I don't believe I ever saw anything that made me think anything more than just, it's really fast fighting and occasionally you just get through the shield.
Well, and that's where, you know, I was like, I didn't even realize that was a major plot point. Like, I think they said a couple lines of dialogue about it, but, like, by the time that Jason Momoa is doing his thing, I'm like, oh, it's just because Jason Momoa is, like, bad enough to be able to rip through the shield, I guess, because he's just, like, lopping off people's heads and stuff left and right. So, like, okay, he's just that good. Thinking about Frodo versus, you know, Paul, like, Frodo does stuff or has stuff happen to him or something, and it's weird because, like, things happen to Paul in the course of the film, but for whatever reason it feels so passive the entire time. Like,
a lot is happening to him,
right? He does make choice, like, he does make choice, but, like, they're not. I don't feel the motivation other than just like, well, this is what I need to do. Like, I'm missing that connection piece, and it's interesting because Frodo is so much better at that than Paul, right?
Well,
Okay.
and we gotta remember these are different stories. And Dune is very heady. Dune is dense and heady as a book, as a movie, as a story. You're not going to get past a sort of headiness and a sort of detachment, I think, to some level of everything. The movie had an opportunity to try to bring more emotion to it, I thought, but it didn't take it. And so it's a lot more heady and clinical, which is okay. That's okay. That's a style of story. Frodo is a different thing. Frodo and all, like, the way they chose to do that is so much more about emotion and pathos, along with the story being grand and all that. But going to Paul, like, I will say that one of the things that does work for me, and book aside, I don't even know how much this is really in the book, but as a movie arc, Jessica and Paul's relationship and Paul's big thing, as far as I got it, was Paul's whole thing is, yes, everything's happening to me. In fact, my entire being happened to me. What I am happened to me. And that's, I think, his big conflict ultimately of the movie, at least the way the movie portrays it, which is the tent scene between him and his mom is the big climax emotionally in a lot of ways for Paul in this movie, which is, I am so done with everything happening to me. And I'm this freak that has to handle all this burden because people make choices that are completely out of my control. And now I'm going to, like, potentially do some sort of holy war, and it's going to be in my dead father's name, and in my name, and in the name of this house. And you made me this way, and why did you do it? And he's angry, right? Like, that all actually tracks for me. And her response to him being like trying to comfort him, and he says no, and she gets sad, and then she goes anyway and comforts him anyway. That strangely works for me. But then I think, and then my brother brings up after the movie, Jessica would break down once because she's a Bene Gesserit, and in the book she never breaks down. The only time she would break down is because of Leto, because she loves Leto so much, and that's not how this story plays it at all. She cries like 30 times in this movie. She's crying all the time. It doesn't mean that she's not powerful or cool. It's just in this movie she's a far more. She's just emotional a lot more. She's got a lot more stress or emotion portrayed out of that character, and so the movie's going this other direction with things, which there was some emotion for me, at least, to mine out of it. But the problem was that even when we got to that tent scene, that was like the scene that had some emotion, but it didn't have enough planting of emotion for me to really have the payoff as big as I want it to be. But I still had a little bit of emotion because I kind of saw what was going on. I was like, that I kind of get that. I can see what you're doing there. But it didn't build up to it well enough. And then, of course, again, like you said, the fight at the end, like what is that? What is that choice for Paul? As a moviegoer alone, I don't know.
Well, and beyond that, like that fight in particular, he actually doesn't have a choice. Like, he even tries to make a different choice, and people are like, sorry, you can't make a different choice. So, like, yeah.
Which, and there's interesting stuff. Like, the visions are overwrought. There's too much vision stuff. Like, cut half of it, might be fine. Mm-hmm. I am, again, subtlety, decisions, symbols. Denis Villeneuve has said in an interview, I really thought it was a powerful image to have a woman with a bloody knife in her hand to symbolize a holy war, jihad. Like, that's what I wanted to symbolize that. I thought it was a very powerful image, so I did it. And you will see it in the movie multiple times. Here's the problem. I think as an average movie viewer, and not knowing Denis Villeneuve's comment, I would also think, what does that mean? Who got stabbed? Why did they get stabbed? Who did it? Was it was it Chani? Was it Zendaya's character? Is she gonna because you see her stab him, right? So, like, my mind would go there because visually and with dialogue, I have no other cue to think about anything but that. There is stuff about a holy war, but that's when you, like, see a bunch of people fighting, or a bunch of people on the Caladan, like raising the banners, and he's like, I don't want it, and he explains to you, that means there's this holy war. So that stuff is holy war. The 30 times you see the bloody knife means nothing. And lots of those images mean nothing. They might mean something to Denis Villeneuve. And maybe in part 2, that will somehow be explored. And so when you come back to part 1, it will mean something to you. And that could be really cool.
That could be really cool, because that's the whole point of his visions. Yeah.
As it stands now, it's nothing.
Right.
And so it feels like wasted time.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say the tent sequence, there's nothing to make me prepared for that moment to actually feel what he's feeling, right? Like, I can understand an emotional outburst because you've just had a bunch of crazy crap happen to you, and now you're like sitting here alone with your mother in a tent, and like I could see that stress finally makes you be like, I'm really kind of mad about this whole thing. But like the whole like his whole dialogue, which again because of mixing was like I got most of it. Like it's like, oh, okay, like and thinking about it and having people explain it to me, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, that there's more of that here than I realized. But it wasn't there for me when I watched the film.
Right.
Right.
And you know, I feel bad for you, Luke. I feel bad that this IMAX, like, cause I didn't know what it was going to be like for IMAX. I wanted to know because I heard Villeneuve liked two things. He's like, IMAX and Dolby are the way to go.
Right.
So I saw Dolby and it was pretty good. I was like, is IMAX, that big screen, going to really make me feel the scale more? And it kind of does, but really you just lost out on some important information, which makes me sad.
Right.
But the
which for me, I'm like, that's actually the fault of the filmmakers. Like,
sure.
You know, if you need to do a Dolby edit and a Dolby correction and an IMAX correction because those are the two that you care about, then do two different versions of your film. Mix them differently. Master them out differently.
We went to the only like real IMAX theater that's within a reasonable distance of the homes, and it's I've been there before, and it's been good in the past, but it's just maybe it's just getting a little old. Maybe they're not quite tuned up the way they need to be for projecting and stuff. I don't know, but it was all of that aside, the movie. Like, how else do you say it except that it's just missing things? It's like it's 2.5 hours, and it's part one of a story, and the biggest issue I have with it is, what are the themes? Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I know. Yeah. What's the real big character choices for Paul in particular? I don't know. Mm-hmm. Like, there's some cool things about Visions, and he's worried about something, and like Visions helping him make choices in the present, which is really cool. There's a few places where that happens. And I like that.
Yeah.
But other than that, like even that, what is the real meaning of that? And I happen to know some other information to know what he's scared about or what it's supposed to be. But even when I know that and watch the movie, I don't feel it.
Right. No, it's just not there because they brush over so much of the information that you need to really get that investment. And the movie just tries to pack so much into 3 hours that there's just too much they had to cut out. In my opinion, that's as simple as what it is.
Well, and it's interesting just thinking about cutting out stuff, right? Because like I'm missing why the bad guy is so bad. Like I realize that like character design wise, he's the bad guy. Okay, you know, I get that like working, you know, with the Emperor to like screw over people. Yeah, that sucks, I guess. You know, like yeah, but like I know that there's companies that do that today, and they don't need to be dressed in black and float creepily off of the floor. Like they just do that because they're greedy or they see it as their best interest or whatever. Like it's like this is normal. Like, oh look, you got a contract taken away from you, so you're gonna go, you know, work to like get the contract back? Duh. Like, there's nothing in this that makes me be like, wow, these guys are truly, really, really evil that I need to do it. And partly that's because I've watched other shows and movies where there really are really, really evil people. I'm like, oh, you need to go down. Like, it's not in this movie. I'm sure it's in the book. But here, I'm just like, okay, you're a guy who doesn't want to lose your contract, and you're kind of mad that people took it. That makes sense.
The strength and the weakness of the movie are the same. Villeneuve, he excels at sort of a world building. I show you a little detail. I take the time to do this thing, and it gives you a characterization of the world and the place you're in. But it's also very subtle sometimes, which means he's not giving you. So like my thing with like my answer to that is the Baron Harkonnen, you know what he like, you know, plot wise, why he cares about things. Mm-hmm. You don't know why he character wise cares about things.
Yes. And I think that's true for all characters. Difference.
Yeah, it's you know a lot of like why characters are dealing with each other in a sort of plot-ish manner. Yes. Because they're stuck in this and they got to do this. But why does the character conduct themselves this way or that way?
Yes.
why would the character make this choice versus this choice to achieve the same end? That's stuff that's basically missing.
Right.
And
I think Leto, you get the most of it, right? Like where he's like,
Sure.
this is what we do and this is how we do it, and then we see him play that out with like, we're getting these people and we're doing this thing and we're, but then he's gone and now nobody's does it.
Yeah. All right, guys. As a closing question to this discussion, and it sounds like we have a lot to come back to. So, all of you two viewers
Dune
out
Part
there,
2 early, a couple weeks from now.
prepared for more discussion on some stuff, because this was only part 1 of part 1, apparently. But here's the question I want to ask. I have heard that the expectation is that Dune is going to become the next great cinematic universe, a la Star Wars, Star Trek, Marvel.
They want to franchise it. That's true.
They want to franchise it. Based on what you've seen in part 1, is that going to happen, and why?
If part 1 is not a good enough answer yet, fundamentally, because again, it is part 1 and we don't know. Like everything about this franchise is entirely dependent on how people receive part 2.
Yes.
And whether or not that somehow, and again, I might not want a franchise, even though I like the idea of Dune and might want to see their stories. I might not want it, but if people respond very well, and it seems like people are responding very well to this movie, but if people respond very well to the next one and they feel satisfied by the story, if they can get there, I think they'll be fine. I think they can totally go off and make. There's so much content. Dune is a history. It is not like they have it built in on the literature to not have to worry about the sequel problems of how do we bring everybody back and do the same thing but different. No, welcome to Dune, where you're not getting everybody back, and we're just going to keep going through the history of this universe as crazier and crazier things go down. And so people will either be on board or not, but Warner Brothers will have the opportunity, I think. Again, all dependent on one thing. Does part 2 satisfy your viewer? If they're satisfied, they've got a chance. If they're not satisfied, it's done.
Yeah, I think I agree. Part 2 is really where Dune starts, right? Like we got the prologue, now we're going to start. And if that goes well, then yeah, you've got like, I don't know how many books that you can go mine for whatever you want, and you could start a Mandalorian type show, you could do an HBO series, you could do a few more films, like whatever, like however you want to tackle that. So yeah, I think there is possibility for for more content. I don't know if there's quite the universe thing though. What do I mean by that? I feel like maybe it's because like Marvel Universe is like the phrase, but like that has like all these thousands of different characters that come together to team up against this one. And I don't think we're going to get that. I think instead it's going to be an anthology more type thing where it's like, here's this and this is the continuation of the story and here's how we're going to tell it. Maybe it's almost like Animatrix, like, hey, in between this film and this film, here are some shorts that we made. I don't know. Like there's just something with that. I think that they could absolutely do more with the franchise. Yes. Is it going to be a universe? I'm not sure.
I think the thing here is they already are trying to make a show that's basically based on content about the Bene Gesserit sisters, which is there's no book as far as I know, there's no book that is the Bene Gesserit sisters and what they were. It's not that. There's lots of information.
History of the traveling Bene Gesserits. Okay.
Well, there's all this information throughout all the books about stuff they've done or are doing, but there's no following them. And so that's a smart way of doing
fun.
TV show. Be we'll just explore the universe. But here's the biggest issue they're going to deal with. They do not have an ending. Dune the first Dune book has an ending. When you go past Dune and you go into Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, you are setting up like Frank Herbert is doing this crazy big thing where he's setting up this really big idea, this really long arc, and he died and he couldn't finish it. And his son went with another writer and they tried to finish it based off his notes. And there's a lot of contention from the fans of, is that actually the ending? Because it kind of sucked. So the point is, they don't actually have an ending. And I would not be surprised that if it does take off, that Denis Villeneuve does Dune Part 1, Dune Part 2, because he wants to do Dune Messiah as well. So let's say he does 3 movies and he's like, I'm out. I want to do other things in my life. And then 10 years later, they're like, Denny, can you like come and solve the problem of the end of all of Dune? Because we have no idea how to do this. And everyone disagrees about how it should end. What do you think, Denny? And if he does, I bet you it'll be very heady and detached.
Well, I mean, having read through Dune Messiah, I'd be fine just ending there. Like, it's a pretty decent ending.
Yeah, it's just not necessarily. Anyway, that all that aside, do they have a franchise in their hands? They absolutely could. It's just, I don't know the longevity. I don't know. It's not Marvel. It's not like fun pick me up every time you come back to Dune World, and it's not Game of Thrones. Come shock me every day I come back to Game of Thrones World.
Yeah,
and it's not a TV show. It's a movie kind of thing. So there could be some cool stuff. I would certainly. I am still up for. I enjoy Dune. I will still enjoy probably other things of Dune. I would love for it to get better, not worse. Like, I'd love to be like, oh, Dune Part 2 actually makes Dune Part 1 really good. I'd love to figure that out. But
yes, that's what I'm hopeful for.
So we'll see. We'll see. There's definitely interest. Everyone I've talked to has seen this movie. Everyone's liked it. I've not talked to one person who has not liked Dune, the movie. It's just been kind of fascinating to me, considering how many issues I see with it and how heady it is and how, like, there's something there that people are responding to, regardless of whether or not I think it's as good as it should have been or could have been or whatever. There's something people are responding to.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jonathan. I have a feeling that the franchise is going to lose a lot of interest because they're going to start seeing what we see or what we've seen. And I don't know that people are going to grasp on, because honestly, like something like the Marvel Universe is so easy to grasp onto, and you can just ride the wave for as ever and ever, in my opinion, right? Star Wars was a great wave to catch, and then they tried to make another one and the wave got smaller, and they tried to make another one and I think the wave got even smaller. And you get the cult following classic at that point. I think Dune could be the cult classic from the beginning in terms of the universe, right? You've got a specialized group of people that have vested interest in it, probably know more of what's going on ultimately, that are actually going to care. And I struggle to see where the people making this franchise, if you will, are going to see the return on their investment that they're expecting because of Marvel and others. So
yeah, and if this first film is any indication, they haven't shown me as an audience member why I'd want to come into the rest of it, other than just like, hey, it's okay.
Yep. So on that note, the recommendation for all of our viewers tonight is go read the book, because it's better anyways, and we will catch you again next time.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Have a good one.